Hey everybody, this is Dr. Flight. Good to be seen. I hope you're doing great. This video is a very, very important topic. We're going to talk about constructing survey questions that are most likely to provide us with reliable and valid data. So we'll talk a little bit about how questions are phrased and how they're created, but also talk about this idea, what is validity, what is reliability, when we talk about questions on surveys. Okay, so bear with me a little bit. We'll talk first about some ideas here with actually creating questions, and we're going to go through most of these that are on the list here. So I'll mention these here. Again, pause the video to understand this, or use this as a guide to go into the textbook and then study these concepts. When we create questions, we want to create survey questions that produce the most, the best answers while confusing the respondent the least. So we'll talk about double-barreled questions, and which are when we have two questions in one statement. So that's a challenge. Leading and loaded questions. When we lead somebody, we guide them towards the answer that we want them to make as opposed to the answer that they should make. Ambiguous questions, questions that again are going to be hard to answer, questions that are overly difficult to understand for your audience, complex questions. Again, making things hard to understand, using double negatives or using language that is greater than, say, an eighth grade level reading level is difficult. And then items that don't have enough answers or have overlapping answers, mutually exclusive, and also exhaustive would be thrown in there as well. So this is just kind of a summary, right? Summary of some of these terms. So let's just talk a little deeper about some of these and give some examples. Like a double-barreled question, again, is if we have two things we're asking in the same statement or question. Do you think Coca-Cola is tasty and is a tasty and refreshing soft drink? So we're asking both, do we think it's tasty, but then we're also asking if it's refreshing or not. So we would want to split these up and ask two separate questions. That would be better to do, because you would be measuring taste in one and then refreshment in another. And that's really what we want to be able to do. If you don't do this, when somebody answers that question, we don't know if they're referring to taste or refreshness, I guess, when we get that question answered. Okay, another one, avoid leading and loading questions. A leading question is one that clues in the respondent as to what the answer is desired for them to say. Do you think that patriotic Americans should buy imported automobiles? When doing so would put American labor out of work? Okay, so that's one where you kind of feel guilty, or you feel bad if you say no, or yes, I guess. So we don't want to put that pressure on them. Take away that language, and it'd be a better question. Do you think people should buy automobiles that are imported from another country? Plain and simple. Doesn't have all the rhetoric and all the inflammatory language that is there. Right, so that would be good. Avoid overstated or dramatic language. Would you buy sunglasses that protect your eyes from harmful ultraviolet rays that cause blindness? Okay, so adding the idea that causing blindness and that the ultraviolet rays are harmful probably produces a little bit more of an extreme position. And what this is going to do is, when people answer this question, they're going to overstate their intentions. So your data will be overstated. your data will have too much of the wrong direction or too much strength in it that isn't realistic. So when purchasing sunglasses, how important is protection from ultraviolet rays? So it's just a different way to say the same question, and it helps us get better data from that particular item, simply because we wrote it that way. Okay, technical jargon or confusing language and just in general. Do you think the distribution of soft drinks is adequate? Okay, distribution. Some people might not know what distribution is. In marketing, we do. We know it's like how the product gets spread throughout the marketplace, but average person may not really know what we mean by that. And adequate is a fine word, but again, it might be a little bit more than we need to say. Are your soft drinks located in a place where you want to buy them? That's just a simpler way of asking a very similar question without any of that language in there. All right, again, these are just good examples of question pitfalls that you might run up against and ways that we can kind of think about fixing them. Another way we have problems is when we ask questions that people have to rely on their memory for, which is fine in some cases, but oftentimes gives us like bad or inaccurate results. How many gallons of soft drink did you consume during the last 4 weeks? Well, first of all, we don't measure soft drinks in gallons. It's just not something that we do. So it would be silly to ask that. And over the last 4 weeks, people don't remember how many times they filled up their cup or how many times they had soft drinks, for the most part. I mean, some people do, but a lot of times that's just not something that we know. So instead, let's change the question, make it a scale. In this case, it's more like a ordinal or Likert almost type of a scale, but basically it gives us a range, and you check the area that is most reasonable for you. And that way you don't need to know the specific, the detail down to the ounce or whatnot, or gallon or whatnot. We can kind of, judge this in a range. It just makes the question easier, and it'll actually give you a lot more accurate data. Now, the data won't be as specific in terms of numbers of gallons, but it'll be probably closer to reality in terms of the data that you get and what people respond to. All right. Again, another memory question. Please list all the departments from which you purchased merchandise on your most recent shopping trip to the department store. Okay, and this one again, some people will remember where they shopped in the store, others won't. So in this case, maybe again, we give them a list of the departments and let them check all the departments they went to last time they went shopping at your store. I went to this one, this one, this one, this one. You just check, and then you're done. It doesn't rely on memory as much. I mean, yes, people have to remember, but at the same time, it's easier to conceptualize this type of question from the respondent's point of view and makes a little bit more sense. All right. Exclusivity and exhaustive responses. So exhaustive responses means that there's an answer for every respondent. Okay. Select the appropriate box indicating your age range, 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 35, 36 to 50. But what if you're over 50? Well, what do you do? Where do you check? So in other words, all the options are not exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list of responses that could be used for respondents to kind of focus on and understand. Okay. Now the other term I used is exclusivity. Now when you're so this last one, exhaustiveness, deals with the number of the responses that people can do. Same here. This is a case where select the appropriate box indicating your age range, 0 to 10, 10 to 20. Uh-oh, we have a problem. If I'm 10, which box do I check? If I'm 20, which box do I check? If I'm 35, which box? So just see where if I meet one of these criteria, I don't know which box to check because the options are not mutually exclusive, right? So we can't have that type of response in there. We have to separate it out. So it would be 0 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 35, 36 to 50, or however you want to do it, but you can't have more than one box to check, right? That violates the rule of exclusivity and is not a cool thing. Okay, last one we'll kind of look at before we move to reliability and validity is this, again, pitfall that you might run up against when you're creating questions or writing out questions. If the labels, you can do this. I mean, you see plenty of surveys that have labels like this. It's not the end of the world. However, the way I interpret occasionally might be different from how somebody else interprets occasionally. So occasionally to me might be once or twice a month. Occasionally to somebody else might be once or twice a year. So how do we answer that? I mean, how do we reconcile that? When we collect the data, all we know is we both checked the same box that said occasionally, but our definition and our subjective opinion of what occasionally is as the responder are vastly different. So that would be a problem in terms of the data that we get. We could clean this up a little bit and give people very specific frames, less than once a week, once or twice, 2 times a week, or 3 or 4 times a week, or in a typical month, I guess is the question. So 1 or 2 times in a month, 3 or 4 times in a month, more than 4 times in a month. And how many times would that be? Now this clarifies and provides very objective definitions for each of the different options to choose and takes subjectivity out of the matter. So it's a better scale, right? It's a better way to collect data than using never, occasionally, sometimes, often, or regularly, only because we can't always agree on what those terms mean. Okay, good. So we talked about those things. There's a lot to do, a lot to think about when we're creating questions. So 2 other topics that we need to talk about, reliability, and then a little bit about some validity there. So scale reliability, and when we talk about reliability here, we're talking about the ability for the questions that you ask, so the questions in the survey, we want to make sure that those questions consistently return the same results. Right. One way that we can do this is something called test-retest. And basically, again, you can pause this and read this, check it out in your book. But basically what we're doing is we're going to look at, ask a question. We might even do it early in the survey, ask a question. And then later on in the survey, ask the question again. Now, another way we do this is we ask people to fill out a survey on day 1, and then a month from now, we ask them to fill out the survey again. And we can compare how they answered that question, either within the survey at 2 points in time or later on at 2 points in time. And we can determine how much reliability there is in and between those points in time, and if that measure consistently returns the same result, then that's a good thing. Another way we look at reliability is reliability within questions within a survey. Okay, so the equivalent form, a technique where we take 2 equivalent scale measures and we compare them. And the results that we get from them. So one thing that we do is one aspect of this is again, we're going to look at this in a second, but duplicating questions or asking the same question in a different way will be an equivalent form technique. We might use the two different questions from two different samples. But the key here is, do the questions act similarly to each other, and do they measure the same thing? So similar to this, we have a concept called internal consistency. And I want you to go back and think about the idea of a scale construct. When we have multiple items that measure a latent variable or something that we don't see directly, a construct. And what we want to do is we want to know if there's something called internal consistency among those questions. So if I ask you about loyalty and I use 3 different questions or statements to measure that in a construct, those 3 questions need to go together. They need to measure the parts of the same thing. And so if they go together, then that's kind of what we're trying to think about. There's 2 different ways to kind of look at this. Basically, we look at half of our sample with one question or one set of the questions, another half of the sample with the other set, and then we compare the 2 together. So that would be called a split half test. Again, if we split the data and we look at one question type with one part of the data, one question type with the other part of the data, compare them, and the degree to which they agree with each other or they maybe correlate with each other, then that would be good. The other thing that we do is we measure something called Cronbach's alpha or alpha. And this is a statistical technique that we use with software, again, to measure the degree in which the questions correlate to each other, the answers of the questions correlate to each other. And if there's high correlation among them, then we say they go together and that they're reliable and they have internal consistency. Okay, so reliability happens at a couple different levels. One, it happens when we use a scale item, a question on a survey, across different different testing environments with different markets, for instance. We use at different points of time. We want to make sure that the questions consistently perform, but also if we have a set of questions that are supposed to go together, we want to make sure that they do go together. We call that internal consistency. It's another measure of reliability. Okay, so again, this is kind of technical, right? And I get that, but we want to make sure that the questions do what they're supposed to do. The last thing that we'll talk about is validity. So does the scale question, does the question on the survey actually measure reality? Does it match, does it yield results that mimic true population behavior? That's what we kind of think about, right? So face validity is when the question just seems to make sense. If you can read the question and on the surface of it, on the basic facts, it seems like it makes sense. That's called face validity. That's something that we will ask other researchers to evaluate our scales. And if they say, yeah, that seems to make sense, then that seems to make sense, right? That's a good thing. That's what we want to be able to use. Content validity is something where, again, we want to make sure that the content or that the responses are reliable. And from a statistical perspective, we want to make sure that the questions tie back to the actual characteristics that we have in question. Okay, so there's a couple different, again, as you do more scale work, advanced scale work, you'd worry about these topics a little bit more. Convergent validity means that the scale items go together, just like we talked about with reliability, where internal consistency suggests that the scale items behave the same way with each other. Well, do they go together? Do they make sense that they're asked together? And then discriminant validity means the idea that one variable measures one construct or item and doesn't measure another thing and doesn't measure another element at the same time. That we have measures that separate from each other, that measure different concepts all at the same time. Pilot testing helps us do this. We can also look at prior research, prior measures. Anytime you're in question about a scale, if you use a scale that's been used in the past, then you'd be much better off than one that you just simply create. In research, it's pretty rare that I will create my own scale item. I almost always use scale items that have been used in research before and have been proven to be reliable and proven to represent reality and represent population's behavior, and also proven not to measure multiple constructs at once. So it has discriminant validity, has convergent validity, face validity when the question seems appropriate based on the topic, and also reliability as well, that it's consistent in how it performs over time. All right, so again, this is, on the edge of theory that we would use in basic market research. It's all stuff that we would test and we would look at much more carefully in advanced market research. So you should at least be confident in knowing the concepts of what validity is, what reliability is, especially in terms of creating survey questions. Okay, so in this video, we talked about different pitfalls, mistakes that we make, that are made when we write questions out. We also spent just a little bit of time talking about some of the theoretical components of survey question writing as it relates to validity and reliability. So, all right, this is it. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for watching. Pause the video, rewind the video, watch it many times, have fun with it, pop popcorn, and otherwise, have a great day.